We're right back into the thick of things for UFC Fight Night. Song Yadong versus Ricky Simón. And as always, I'm here with Harry Powell to discuss this card. Look, we had a couple of fallouts from this card, Harry. Not too much anyone can do about that, but it does leave us wanting a few more fights. Bonus thing, and you mentioned it, it's what we've been longing for. Only an 11-fight card this time, so not so bad. Not a big slog like a 15-fight card. You think like 3 or 4 fights don't add up, but they kind of do. Where I don't know about you, I don't know whether your experience is different watching them back, because I know you do watch a lot of them back now the next morning, but I found myself like dipping in and out of cards, like for some interest and stuff when I'm watching it live. I guess when you have the luxury of fast forwarding it and stuff like that and cutting out all the BS, as they say, might make it a little bit different. Would I be right or wrong in saying that, Harry? What are your thoughts on that, first of all?
So I think for me, I even struggle, even watching it back, I struggle to like keep the attention span and everything else. And it's because I will watch fights from the bottom of the card to the top of the card, right? I often don't watch the main event first because I want to see how the night built. You know, you can kind of get a sense of how the night built. You watch the first fight and maybe it ends in a quick finish or whatever. And then, you know, I think about this from the March card in London, and you watched the card build. You saw it build. You saw the momentum build and everything that went with that. And even for me, a 15-fight card is a slog. And like you said there, 3 fights, you don't feel like they add much or they don't add up to much. And the answer is that's an hour worth of broadcasting, you know, potentially even more than an hour of broadcasting. And so when that drops off, yeah, it's hard. Like, it is hard. And I think there is only so much, like for me personally, when I'm looking at them and I'm really trying to watch the fights from an analytical perspective, 15 fights to do that is a lot of fights. So I'm very, very grateful for an 11-fight card. And long may they continue, not that they will.
Yeah, 100%. Because the difficult thing for me as well is that sometimes the interest will run away, or, you know, if you maybe get 2 or 3 decisions on a prelims card as well, I find it hard to kind of get a little bit engaged coming into the main card then. But like, I think an 11-fight card or a 10-fight card is absolutely perfect in my book. So I don't know whether it's going to happen or not, but I think it's more forcefully that this card is an 11-fight card more so than anything else. Because as I said, we had a lot of pullouts. But speaking of pullouts, Song Yadong in the main event is taking on Ricky Simón, and there's been no pulling out of that fight. Sorry, Harry. I'm sorry, dude. I'm sorry. I try not to do too many Song Yadong jokes, but yeah, I think this is a very interesting fight in the bantamweight division. And look, I think you could put any two in the top 30 in the bantamweight division, and you're going to have an interesting fight. Big one here, obviously, Song Yadong is coming back off of that disappointing defeat to Corey Sandhagen. It'll be disappointing for him, Harry, but it won't be disheartening for him, because he will have gotten in there with elite level competition, held his own for a while, got a nasty cut in that fight, but he'll have gained a lot of lessons there. When you watch back that fight against Corey Sandhagen with Song Yadong, you know, in your opinion, what would you feel that Song Yadong would be taking away from that? Changes in his game. You know, these are always the type of fights that I'm interested to see fighters in, like I've said in the past. You know, ones after a big defeat, you know, you reassess things, you look at things. You know, he's 25 years of age as well. He's like a young veteran at this stage. So, you know, we have to be a little bit forgiveful when it comes to that. But you do see those improvements there. But sometimes you just come in against the better guy. And I think that's what happened when he went in there and fought Corey Sandhagen in his last fight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest things that I would be taking away in the Song Yadong camp is he just looked patient in there. And he sort of talked about this in Fight Week this week. And that's that he's like, yeah, I'm only 25. Like, yeah, okay, I've had a few fights and I've been in the UFC a little while now, but I'm still learning. I'm still growing. I'm still a young fighter. Now, I mean, we can argue whether he's a young fighter, but he's certainly young in his maturation process. And I think that there's something to be said for that. There's something to be said that at 25, like I remember when I was 25, you know, and it's only 4 years ago, but I thought I was the man, right? I thought I knew everything. And then now, 4 years later, I realized that I didn't know a thing. And so even when you apply that to life, let alone fighting, there is so much that Song Yadong will be able to learn in the next little while, especially when he's surrounding himself with the sort of training regimen that's necessary for an elite level fighter. Now, coming from this Corey Sandhagen fight, yes, okay, he had a nasty cut, and Corey Sandhagen was fighting very well in that fight, but he certainly wasn't being blown away. He certainly wasn't in a danger of, just getting ran over there by Corey Sandhagen. I think that's what you take away from this. At 25, it's like the first time in competition when you roll with a black belt and you have a good round with him, and he might catch you at the end of, if you've got a 10-minute match and he catches you 8 minutes in, you're like, Jesus, I hung with that guy, And if you're Song Yadong, that's exactly the thing that you're saying. You're saying, actually, I'm not that far away from this guy. And Corey Sandhagen just went out in his last performance and put on one of the best performances of his career. And so if I'm Song Yadong, I'm doubling down on what I did in that fight. I'm being patient. I'm looking for my shots. Because remember, he is a fighter that's kind of perfect for the scoring criteria right now. Because when he hits you really, 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 really hard. And those are massively impactful shots. And now, whilst this fight against Ricky Simón is an entirely different style to Corey Sandhagen, I think that there are lessons, specifically in patience and timing, that he can really reap rewards from.
So you're looking at patience and timing as the two big ones that he's going to take away from Corey Sandhagen. And look, obviously it was his first main event slot. Sometimes that is a hard adjustment to get to because you're trying to, you're using your cardio in a different kind of way, whereas that you might be a little bit more hesitant in the fight and we've seen that time and time again with other fighters as well, who maybe are holding back a little bit because they don't know how much they're going to have left in rounds 4 and rounds 5. So those are the fights that you need to be in to progress though. And he got that against Sandhagen. He's back at 3 rounds with Ricky Simón now. And, when we're talking about a test and a good test for Song Yadong, he's getting a damn good test here in Ricky Simón, who's coming in here riding on the crest of a wave of a win streak, won his last 5, getting finishes in those last 5 as well, and a really impressive win by submission against Jack Shore in his last fight. But Ricky Simón, it was kind of like you didn't know if he would have had a performance like that or a win like that in his kind of repertoire. Look at it, got in there, lost against Uriah Faber and Rob Font. So at the time, 2 guys who were fairly prominent in the top of the division in the bantamweight, Rob Font obviously still being that way. After that, obviously, he reassessed a lot of things and put together a hell of a win streak. Wins over Ray Borg, Perillo, Kelleher, Asuncao, and definitely the most impressive one with Jack Shore in his last fight. But for him, this is another step up in competition as well. For Song Yadong, with all due respect to Simón, it's a step down in competition, but a good step down in competition if you're going to fight anyone down in the rankings. I think this is the perfect fight at the perfect time for both of these guys to see exactly where they're at. What lessons did Song Yadong learn in that Corey Sandhagen fight? And can Ricky Simón kind of come in here and beat a guy who's on the rise and has a lot of heat behind him right now? It's really, really interesting stylistic matchup, Harry. When you're looking at both of these guys, for me, I don't really know. Like sometimes I can map out in my head the way I can see fights going. The way I'm trying to map out this fight is you would feel Song Yadong is going to go in there and fight relatively similar to what he's done before. There's no shame in going out there and losing to someone like Corey Sandhagen. So the changes do not have to be drastic coming into this fight. Like you said, a little bit more timing, a little bit more patience. He is a bona fide wild man. We've seen him in the octagon going crazy, Song Yadong, in the past. With this too, I think timing and patience is going to be very important because I would feel that Ricky Simón is going to try and put Song Yadong on his back. I don't think he's going to want to stand and trade with someone who hits as hard as Song Yadong. And I feel that's kind of going to be the kind of foundations of how this fight is fought by both men. It's going to be a dictation of pace, a dictation of distance, and whoever is able to dictate where this fight goes, whether it's going to be Song Yadong who will keep it on the feet, or whether Ricky Simón will kind of try and mix it up and look to try and grapple and clinch and kind of disrupt the pattern of Song Yadong coming in here. When you're looking at these two guys, Harry, when you see them matching up, what are you kind of looking at in comparison? Comparisons between both of these guys' style? what are you looking at to try and decipher who's going to win this?
So if I can just pigtail off some of the points you made before, like I think that the matchup itself is great matchmaking for a couple of reasons. One, Song Yadong is giving Ricky Simón kind of the chance that Corey Sandhagen gave him, but in a slightly different way. Like Ricky Simón and Song Yadong are in a relatively similar position in the rankings, and so it makes sense from a ranking perspective. But it's also that Song Yadong stepped up, had a big test in Corey Sandhagen. It didn't go his way on the night, no problem. Well, Ricky Simón now deserves a name. And Song Yadong elevated his own name by going in there with Corey Sandhagen and performing in the way that he did. And so this one is over 5 rounds. And so we're going to see some interesting pacing there. Topology tells me it's over 5 rounds, so they must have agreed to do 5 rounds. You're on mute. Don't worry about it.
I thought it was still at 3 there I didn't realize it was back up at 5, but fair play to the guys.
Absolutely fair play to them. I hope they get paid what they're worth. And look, I think the stylistic matchup here is interesting. And I feel like we learn a lot from the Jack Shaw performance from Ricky Simón. And I think the story of that was that he was just the better athlete. Jack had good footwork. He had good timing. He level changed well when Ricky was trying to shoot for takedowns and whatever. But there was just such an athleticism difference that he was able to secure positions on Jack Shaw and obviously eventually get the knockout on Jack Shaw via just superior athleticism and power. Well, that's not going to happen in this fight. Song Yadong is a very, very good athlete. It's dynamite in his hands. And I feel like, as you say, the real interesting battle for me is the footwork battle here. Ricky Simón is somebody that stands really low, really crouched in his stance. And whilst that makes his ability to shoot fantastic, and he obviously has to cover far less distance, it also takes away some of the feints from his game, right? Because he's already low. He's already low in his stance. And so if he goes much lower, it's incredibly obvious what's coming. And equally, because he doesn't stand tall, he loses like a third of that feint game. Song Yadong is slightly different. He is much more of a gliding, edging fighter that's looking for those counter hooks. And if I'm Song Yadong, I am making sure that I am pushing Ricky Simón back as much as I possibly can with my footwork, with my cage cutting. I'm cutting angles on Ricky Simón. I'd like to see him change stance often, because one of the things we talk about with Israel Adesanya is when he's fighting grapplers, it's really difficult for them to set their stance and find a single leg or find a double leg entry when he's constantly switching which foot is forward. We saw the same in Alexander Volkanovski versus Islam Makhachev, is we see Makhachev dive on all sorts of positions, but when they're constantly switching stance and constantly changing angle and constantly moving and constantly adjusting, it's a nightmare to try and set up a takedown because you can't shoot naked, not at this sort of level. And, I think that's the case in this fight too. If I'm Song Yadong, I'm feinting knees up the middle. If I'm Song Yadong, I'm feinting long uppercuts. I'm looking to work Ricky Simon's legs because when he's low in that stance, the weight is all in his feet. And so if you chop at that leg, chop at that Achilles, chop at that knee, he's going to feel it much more because the ability for him to withdraw his leg is taken away. Now on Ricky Simon's side, use that power, use that explosivity, use the just freak double leg that he seems to have, and force Song Yadong to think about more than just striking immediately. He has to go in there and take a little bit of a book of Merab Dvalishvili, which is just be ruthless. Be relentless in your pursuit of takedowns. Now, that doesn't mean you don't strike. It doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean that you just blindly, nakedly drop onto double legs and single legs. It's not that at all. But you need to make Song Yadong so tactically aware that grappling can come, clinches can come at any minute that he's second-guessing his own footwork, his own timing, his own reads of what you are doing. And so, like you said, as with every fight in MMA, it is entirely based on who is going to be able to dictate the adherence to a game plan. But for me, this is going to be won and lost in the middle of the cage footwork battle. If Song Yadong can push Ricky Simón back and do it from a functional perspective and not overreaching, he's going to win this fight because it's far harder to counter double leg and counter wrestle when you're on the back foot. If Ricky Simón is able to force Song Yadong to think more about the grappling than he is about his own striking, well, Ricky Simón has a mean overhand. He's got a mean hook. Jack Shaw found out the hard way. And so he will be able to find his own repertoire of strikes and damage and grappling should he be able to make Song Yadong think twice.
Yeah, 100%. Because, and I was going to mention that, and the fact that you did it just there, I'll bring it up now. The power that Ricky Simón has is quite impressive as well. And he could come in here and just gain the respect of Song Yadong pretty early too, which is another thing that might change the course of this fight. You know, you mentioned something that was brought up in Max Holloway and Arnold Allen when we were kind of breaking down that fight. And that's how difficult it is to kind of counter switching of stances when you're trying to close the distance to take someone down. When you're trying to do that and someone is changing stances, in your opinion, what would be the best form of doing that? Is it just trying to cut off the cage and get into the clinch more so than just shooting naked? Obviously, we're not shooting naked takedowns. That's a natural no-no. It's very difficult to set up your strikes when you have an active guy who's switching stance as well. What I would think you do is you try and cut off that cage, try and get his back into that black outside line, where that you can just close the distance real quickly, get a clinch, and then work your takedown there, whether it's a body lock, inside trip, outside trip, whatever you want. But it's something that we're seeing quite a lot more in mixed martial arts lately, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think one of the advantages of having a cage is if you have some nice footwork patterns and you have an ability to push a fighter back behind that tram line. You and I talk about that tram line because it's the danger zone. Right? If you're an anti-grappler or somebody that prefers to strike, then the moment your feet are touching behind that tram line, you got problems. There's every potential that one of these athletes can just crash you into the cage, and now your defensive grappling has to kick in. And so if I'm Ricky Simón, you can take risks if you want to shoot in open cage. If Song Yadong is biting on feints and is switching with a specific reaction, and you can time that reaction, sure, duck under the reaction and drop yourself into a double leg, no problem. We saw that with Jan Blachowicz, and he did it perfectly against Israel Adesanya. He forced Israel Adesanya into thinking this was a pure striking battle and was able to get the read, get the timing of Israel's feints. And as soon as one of the feints came that he was comfortable with, he dropped in on a double leg, and we obviously saw what happened from that result. So I'm not saying that Ricky Simón can't shoot in open space, but he has to force Song Yadong to set it up for him. He can't just, as we've said, blindly drop in on a double leg and try and find his way to the hips. In terms of cage grappling, I think I completely agree with you, because the other side of this is 5 rounds. And so we know that Song Yadong is a big hitter. Well, is he a big hitter in rounds 4 and 5 when his arm's full of lactic acid because he's been forcing to dig underhooks and pull Ricky Simón back up and use all of that concentric movement? Is he? I don't know. We've never found out. And so if I'm Ricky Simón and I'm finding that I'm struggling maybe in open cage, maybe I feel like the striking is doing a little more damage to me than I'd prefer. Maybe I can't find my own shots. Maybe I just run him to the cage and ask him some questions there. Because this is really what this fight is about, is asking the questions of either fighter. And I think the other thing for me, and we haven't seen Ricky Simón do this with great ability in these type of fights, but if I'm Ricky Simón, I'm working the body of Song Yadong with every single opportunity that I can. Because with big hitters, and again, Song Yadong might have fantastic cardio and might be able to run that pace for 25 minutes. We haven't seen that yet. Hence, this is a question we come into the fight with. But if I'm Ricky Simón, I'm going to try and sap away as much of that energy as possible. So I'm going to work the body. I'm going to force him to grapple. I'm going to force his arms to fill with lactic acid. And I'm just going to keep asking him questions.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see. And I agree with everything that you said there too. I mean, you don't want to go out there and do what Curtis Blades did and just play the striking battle with Song Yadong. Like, it frustrates the life out of me. I said it time and time again, and maybe I'm like a parrot, but when you're going in there against a heavy hitter, you've got to mix it up early. I don't care what anybody says. And the whole point of doing that is what you said. You're forcing the guy to grapple. So you're forcing the guy to clinch and hold and grip for prolonged periods of time, which draws blood to the arms, which makes it super, super, super difficult to, number one, keep your arms up in the later rounds. It's hard. I found that the hard way, and I'm sure you did too. It was one of the things that shocked me the most when I competed for that small time was how hard it is to keep your hands up when you're coming into round 3 with all of that blood that's rushing up there. And then number 2, obviously, you're going to slow and you're going to take some of the pop off the punches from Song Yadong. I believe this fight, if we were to give mini predictions going in here, I believe Song Yadong does have it in him to keep this fight standing if he wants to. There may be moments that he will find himself with his back against the cage, or maybe his ass on the canvas as well. But I do feel that he's good enough to get back up. And I think that he'll mainly dictate this fight on the feet. I can see a finish here for Song Yadong, to be honest. I really can. And it would be a good finish too. And that's taking nothing away from Ricky Simón at all and the qualities he has as a fighter. I just believe that Song Yadong is a very, very good fighter on the rise, who will have learned a lot of lessons being in there with elite level competition. And I'm wondering, are you along the same lines, or can you call this at all, or what do you expect to see happening in this fight?
I mean, as you know, I hate doing predictions because I always get them wrong. But like, the way that my analysis leans, the way that my brain is leaning in this is Uriah Faber's already had a camp for Ricky Simón. And now Uriah Faber has transitioned to essentially being a head coach type role. So you've got a camp full of people that are renowned for their wrestling. You've got Josh Emmett in that camp. You've got a ton of other grapplers in that camp that can emulate Ricky Simón's style. Because, and again, this is no disrespect whatsoever, but Ricky Simón's style is replicable, right? It's not one of those really crazy, unorthodox, Tim Elliott type awkward styles. It's a style that you can study. It's a style that you can have bodies in the gym replicate for you. And if you watch somebody like Song Yadong, he looks a lot, feels a lot like an amalgamation of a lot of the fighters in Team Alpha Male, right? He's got that heavy set stance, big hitter, can do the defensive grappling, but can also do the scrambling should it be required of him. And I think for me, it's going to be an interesting question, right? I agree with you. I think Song Yadong is the better striker. I think he has the better footwork. And I think he should be able to keep this on the feet. But what if he doesn't? You know, like, that's kind of the question I have here. This is a 25-minute fight. We know that Ricky Simón has a good gas tank. And so the questions I'm looking for from here are actually largely from Song Yadong of like, how do you bounce back from the Corey Sandhagen loss? How do you feel going in against a guy that is powerful, is young, is hungry, is athletic, and can do the wrestling things as well as anyone? That's the questions I have here, because I believe, and my ceiling for Song Yadong is right up there. Like, I could see Song Yadong challenging for a title, maybe not winning a title, but challenging for a title at some point in his career. And if that is to be the case, I expect him to bounce back with a big win against Ricky Simón.
100%, as do I. That kind of wraps us up for the main event. Look, we had a little bit of a conversation about one of the fighters in the co-main event. Caio Borralho is taking on Michał Oleksiejczuk in the co-main event. We've talked about Caio Borralho, and that's who we're going to talk about here now, who has been in this slot a couple of times in the UFC so far, Harry. And, we talked about it with Spencer, and he agreed as well. That, UFC are putting him in this position to kind of give him this push, this jump up in the middleweight division. But me looking at this, and this has been from his very first fight in the UFC. The guy has fought in nothing but co-main events, if I remember correctly. But we're kind of getting the same level of competition here. And if you're looking at Caio Borralho as a contender in the middleweight division, you yourself, and you said it to me, you're not that pushed on him. You don't really think he's got the capabilities to get up to the top of the division. And, he's coming in here against a tough guy as well. Guy will be looking to stand and bang. But as you said before we started recording, Borralho is probably just going to try and take this down and utilize his Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So we're kind of in this Groundhog Day of opponents for Caio Borralho right now, where we're not really learning too much. They're not willing to push him. They're kind of giving him the same level of opponent each time in a co-main event slot. And yeah, I don't really know what to kind of make of his progress right now. Why aren't you convinced at Borralho? Why do you not think he's not good enough to get? How good do you think he could be potentially? Do you think we're talking about a stalwart top 15, top 10? Are you thinking we're going crazy if we're thinking we're going to see him in the top 5 over the next year or two? What's your thoughts on Borralho, and why are you not as keen maybe as the UFC portrayed to be, I guess, by putting him in this co-main event slot and trying to give him the notoriety?
So I think that's where I'll start, right? Is it feels manufactured to me. You go from a Contenders Series win, which fair play, good win, no problem. But then you're in, as you say, co-main event slots or prominent slots on cards from then. That tells me something, right? That tells me that there is something about you that the UFC want to promote, right? Now, usually what that is skills. What that is some form of dominance, some form of something that we need to pay attention to. Well, in the fights that I've seen, he's fought largely strikers. I'm going to butcher some names now, lads. Are you ready? Makhmud Muradov, generally a striker. Arman Petrosian, 100% a striker. Omar Gadziev, oh my God, almost got it. Omar Gadziev, largely a striker, right? Bit of grappling, but largely a striker. And so the fight before them was going to be Dustin Stolfus, again, striker. Jamie Pickett, horrendous fighter. And so what we're looking at here is, what I feel we're looking at here is the UFC trying to manufacture a guy who is 30 years of age, right? And they're trying to push him to a position in a division that is sorely, desperately screaming for contenders. They're trying to manufacture a contender. The problem I have with that is if you put Caio Borralho against a Sean Strickland, a Chris Curtis, a Kelvin Gastelum, any of that just under the elite of that division, I don't pick him in any of those fights. Yes, he can do some grappling and his striking is okay, but something Sean and I talked about in the Speaker's Corner that will come out sooner rather than later is MMA is moving in a trajectory where having a specialism is not going to be enough. And if you do not have a very deep understanding of every facet of the sport, if you then choose to show your identity, show your personal characteristics in a specific perspective, i.e. Islam Makhachev knows how to strike, but chooses to grapple. That's his own personal perspective on how fighting should be. That's his own artistic choice. Fine. No problem. We saw with Alexander Volkanovski, he can grapple just fine. He chooses to stand. He chooses to strike. Robert Whittaker, Israel Adesanya, similar things, right? They choose to be a certain thing, although they have a deep understanding of the facets of the other thing. Maybe less so with Izzy and grappling, but whatever, right? If that is not the case with Caio Borralho, and I feel like it is not, well, then he's going to get run through at that top division. And maybe that's all they care about is the UFC, is that they just want to manufacture a guy that will be able to go in there. They'll give him a Paulo Costa or you don't want to do that, but like you give him a somebody that he can go in there and grapple against and look good against and get a win, a bigger name that he can get a win against. And so you're off to the races and here's a contender for Israel Adesanya. Maybe, possibly, I don't know. But the short-sightedness in that feels maligned to me. And when I watch Caio Borralho, the raw materials of his grappling are absolutely there, but I need more. And Michał Oleksiejczuk is not the fighter to bring that out.
No, do you think Oleksiejczuk can kind of come in and maybe cause an upset here? He has looked strong since moving down from light heavyweight, 2 knockouts. Opponents haven't been all to write home about. So I'm interested to see what's going to go on here in this fight, but it's likely that Borralho might try and stand and bang with him, but as soon as his back is against the wall, he's going to have that ace in his back pocket, and that ace in his back pocket is the grappling, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But Oleksiejczuk's a tidy enough kickboxer. Like he's a relatively strong, fundamentally strong. I don't mean physically strong. I mean fundamentally strong kickboxer. Kicks well to the body, jabs a bit, has okay footwork, and like he is. I don't mean this in a mean or nasty way or whatever, but he's fine, you know? Like went out and looked okay against Modestas-Bukauskas, loses to Jimmy Crute, grappler, loses via Von Flu over in St. Peru, guess what? Grappler. Goes out, loses to Dustin Jacoby, and I think that's the level, right? The level is Dustin Jacoby is a really good level of kickboxing and could do a little bit of the grappling, and Oleksiejczuk goes out and loses that fight handy. Comes in, loses to beats Sam Alvey. What are we doing booking Sam Alvey in fights in fucking 2022, you know? Whatever. Anyway, goes out, Cody Brundage. Now, that was a good win. Cody Brundage is a guy that can wrestle a little bit, looks for the takedown. We're going to see him on this card a little bit later. But again, Cody Brundage is not the level that we should be writing home about, you know? And so I suspect Caio Borralho should have enough to go in there and run through Oleksiejczuk with the grappling should he choose to grapple. Like you said, this is 3 rounds. And if he wants to go, my advice to Caio Borralho in this I would take the Khabib Nurmagomedov route. And that's for the 2 rounds of the first 3, you take him down, you smother him, you wear him out, you make him work, you lay on him, you make it heavy, you land your shots. You don't finish him, but you land your shots and you do what you need to do. And then when he comes out in the 3rd, exhausted, and you've still got 50% of your gas tank, you put the pressure on the feet and you see what you can do. If you get into some trouble, guess what? You've got the grappling in the back pocket. If you don't get into trouble and you knock him out, well, then you turn around to the crowd and you're like, I knocked your striker out. And that's the storyline, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Interesting to see what happens in the co-main event. You mentioned Cody Brundage, and he's in the next fight. We don't have to wait too long to talk about him. He's fighting Rodolfo Vieira, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu multi-time world champion, who got it all taken away from him from Fluffy Hernandez. I cannot mention Rodolfo Vieira without mentioning Fluffy Hernandez now at this stage. But look at tough times, Harry, for Rodolfo Vieira coming into this fight with only 1 win in his last 4. And like you said, Cody Brundage will have some problems here, but it seems to be, you know, you got to stay safe early for Rodolfo Vieira. It's kind of the theme of this preview show so far is kind of stay safe early and bring him into the later rounds and see what happens after that. Are you expecting Cody Brundage to get the hand raised or Rodolfo Vieira to kind of turn back and get into the win column once more in this fight?
Rodolfo Vieira gets hit way too much and Cody Brundage hits hard. I think this is a nightmare matchup for Rodolfo Vieira. Cody Brundage can grapple. Obviously, if we're doing sport jiu-jitsu, I'm not picking Cody Brundage in a month for Sundays, but that's absolutely not what we're looking at here. You know what I mean? Even at a black belt, you got a 10-minute match, you know? And in some rule sets, you got an 8-minute match at black belt. And so this is a tough ask for Rodolfo Vieira. If we get into grappling scrambles, of course, a man of that pedigree, a man of that awareness on the ground, anything can happen, right? I can absolutely see a position where there's a grappling exchange. Rodolfo Vieira manages to get the better of it, puts Cody Brundage on the ground and just mauls him. I can absolutely see that happening.
Do you think he should try and do that early on in fight and just say, fuck this, let's go for broke. I'm going to be tired anyway in round 3. Let's just go ham here early and try and get him out of there. And then if it doesn't work out, I know you're up shit creek, I guess. But I mean, look at, we've kind of trun the book out in, you know, we were talking about Ricky Simón kind of coming in there and going ham on Song Yadong. That's, I think, what Rodolfo Vieira, like he's obviously and quite literally the better grappler here. I think he just needs to go for broke here in the first 3 or 4 minutes and try and get Cody Brundage out of there. And then, I mean, if you play it safe and things aren't going your way and you're still tired in round 3 and you haven't pushed for a finish in the grappling department, I think you're asking for trouble one way. So it's kind of a double-edged sword here for Rodolfo Vieira, isn't it?
Yeah, it's tough. Like if I was in his corner, I'd probably be asking him to to play possum a little and allow Cody Brundage to close the distance and try to duck under some jabs, try to duck under some right hands and find his way to a single, find his way to a double. But that allows Cody Brundage to walk on forward knowing that, okay, there might be a takedown coming, but I also know how to sprawl. I also know how to play front headlock. I also know how to defend front headlock. I also know that MMA grappling is significantly different to sport grappling. And so I kind of agree, but I would never advise a fighter, you got 5 minutes in the first round, go out and do your thing. And if not, you're fucked, obviously. But I don't know. It's tough. Like, Rodolfo Vieira goes out and loses a unanimous decision against Chris Curtis and doesn't look great in doing so either. Just got the head beat off him, was diving on desperation takedowns. Chris Curtis, obviously a far superior fighter, and was just ducking those takedowns, keeping away, keeping safe. The Dustin Stolfus win, I mean, sure, whatever. I don't know.
That's what that was kind of what I was alluding to with the Chris Curtis. Look, he went out there and he proved to everyone, oh yeah, like we talked about, and we seen him gassing out heavily before in fights, but there he is going to a unanimous decision, and you're thinking on paper, oh yeah, he can go the distance now. But like you said, he didn't look great in doing that. So I'm like, I don't know, in certain ways, and you're dead right in what you're saying. You're not telling your fucking fighters to do that, but like the fighter himself is the one who's in the ultimate most control when they're in there. And I don't know. I'm wondering if Rodolfo should just fucking say, fuck it. Throw it all out there. Go for broke. And if it doesn't work out, well, it doesn't work out. So, look, that's going to be an interesting one in the middleweight division. We'll see what happens there. Fernando Padilla is coming in based off his win for Dana White's looking for a fight on Fury FC 46. A good elbow knockout win there. Sealed the deal. No contender series for him, Harry. It's straight in against Julian Erosa, Juicy J, who was on a quite impressive win streak and looking good too until Bruce Leroy, Alex Caceres, absolutely put him to sleep with a head kick and punches in the first round. That was a big shock, number one. And he'll be looking to bounce back here too against the UFC debutant. A difficult task for Padilla coming in here, Harry. I mean, we don't know too much about him, but this is going to be a tough test. But no, Juicy J has been in exciting fights. Padilla wants to come in here, obviously, and put on a show as well. So that might make for an interesting fight overall.
Yeah, look, I'll be very honest. I did not have the time this week to go and search up Padilla, but I know that if you're a Fury FC champion, that means something in America, in the same vein that it means if you're a Cage Warriors champion over here, that proves something. And so that's a Dana White looking for a fight type card, as you've said, and you get picked up. Julian Erosa is a 50-50 fighter now in the UFC. As you say, had a really nice win streak snapped by Bruce Leroy. But we know, one thing we know is who Julian Erosa is, right? Julian Erosa is a guy that fights long, fights well, has some submissions in his back pocket, can do a bit of the grappling, sticks a jab in people's faces, can be unorthodox, can have some variety, but is a pretty straight up and down fighter. And so if I'm Padilla and I come in and I walk through Julian Erosa, boy, oh boy, we got a fighter on our hands, right? We know that you go out there like Hakeem Dawodu, really good fighter, right? Solid fighter, great record. Charles Jourdain, we've talked about him before, really, really solid fighter. And so if you go out and you run through Julian Erosa, we know what we have on our hands. And clearly the UFC thinks something of this gentleman should he be on the main card, right?
Yeah, it's interesting to see what happens there. And I always like watching Juicy J perform as well. I'm excited to see Padilla come in here and do it. Waldo Cortes-Acosta will take on Marcos Rodrigo de Lima in the heavyweight division. That has to be probably, Harry, I think the only thing we can say about this fight, it has to be the longest fight in terms of names that we've ever seen inside the UFC. Would you agree?
Who gives a fuck, honestly?
Yeah, this isn't a great one. Waldo Cortes-Acosta came in contender series, picked up unanimous decision win over Jared Van Der Raa, and another one against Chase Sherman. If you go to a decision,
it's not good.
It's not
Jared
good,
Van Der
isn't
Raa
it? Not?
And Chase Sherman, Immediately cut. Immediately.
Yeah, you're gone. If Harry was the matchmaker, he'd be out. He would be out right now. De Lima picked up a nice win over Andrei Arlovsky in his last fight. I'd expect De Lima to take this. We'll move on to Josh Quinlan versus Trey Waters. This is a fight that's been made at the death. Trey Waters has just came in. News broke yesterday of a couple of fight fallouts and a couple of replacements. Trey Waters is a late replacement coming in here against Josh Quinlan, who is 6-0, who did pick up a nice knockout win in his UFC debut against Jason Witt. And he's a guy that, someone that's worth keeping an eye on. I had an eye on him based off his Dana White Contender Series performance. Josh Quinlan has some fire in his hands, Harry, and definitely one to definitely keep an eye on in the 175 pound or 170 pound division.
Absolutely. And I think for Trey Waters, like just looking at his record, the only loss he has is to Gabriel Bonfim, somebody that I'm quite high on. But looking outside of that, he'd had at 5-0, he hadn't fought a guy that was on a solid winning streak other than a 3-0 fighter. And you get chucked in against Gabriel Bonfim, who was 12-0 at the time. That's obviously a very, 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 very tough fight in your Contender Series debut. But look, he comes out, goes out, wins a main event at LFA, and that's for a title too. So we mentioned Fury FC. An LFA title is also a very notable one in the States as well. So he's coming in here at short notice, though. Tough fight at short notice, really, for Trey Waters. That fight will kick off the main card. It's slim pickings really carry on the prelims. One fight, we'll go down through it. Martin Budde versus Jay Collier in the heavyweight division. There's not too much to say about that fight. Cody Durden versus Charles Johnson is one that stood out to both you and to I as well, because that's a fantastic matchup. It feels like we're seeing Charles Johnson every 2 or 3 events here, and I don't mind it at all. I don't mind his style. He's a very well-rounded fighter. Good win over Jimmy Flick, lost a split decision to Ode Osborne in his last fight. He's back in here every 2 months or so, Harry. And over the course of the last 4 months, he's November, January, February, and here we are again at the end of April. So he's squeezing those fights in. He's going in against a tough and durable Corey Durden as well. I know this one gets you excited. I'm excited for this one too, actually, as we want to tune in for on the undercard. How do you kind of see it playing out? I just want to see the grappling exchanges. Like, I think Charles Johnson fights really long for that division and knows how to do it. Has a really lovely teep, has some nice jabs, has some nice right hands, some nice angle change, check left hooks. But I just want to see the grappling exchanges, because something that I think people didn't expect was how close some of the grappling exchanges with Muhammad Mokaev were. Obviously, for Cody Durden, he got wrapped up real quick in that guillotine, and these things happen in MMA. But everyone sort of went into this saying, into the Muhammad Mokaev Charles Johnson fight, Muhammad is this incredibly good grappler, really, really good wrestler, blah, blah, blah. Yes, he dominated Charles Johnson, took him down multiple times, but Charles Johnson did a good job of scrambling and getting back to his feet and offering Muhammad Mokaev some problems to solve. And so I'm really interested more than anything in watching the grappling and seeing how that specific part of the fight plays out. That's where I'm most excited.
Yeah, I was really impressed by Charles Johnson, and we did cite that in the previous preview shows of how unwilling he is to accept takedowns. And I think it was more so cardio than anything else, because Mokaev was relentless in that fight, as he was with Cody Durden as well. But, 2 interesting guys to keep an eye on in the 125-pound division. Moving on down, we've got in the women's bantamweight division, Stephanie Egger versus Irina Alekseeva, who is coming in for her UFC debut, I believe, off a good win against Stephanie Page in Bellator. We know Stephanie Page, she obviously got a win over Danny McCormack, someone who hits hard. Stephanie Egger, that was, she pulled off the Brazilian tap against Maria Bueno Silva. Do you remember that? Remember, she didn't let on that she tapped when she did, but bounced back with a win against Aylin Perez, but nothing really to write home about here. Interesting to see how Alekseeva gets on in the UFC, because that win over Stephanie Page for me is very impressive. So I'm excited to get another look at her inside the octagon here.
Absolutely. I mean, look, Irina Alekseeva is being signed off a loss. It's not really something I like to see very often. For Stephanie Egger, obviously she's got a really, really, really strong judo background. Just as a funny story, like when I was running the grappling promotion, we were looking to do a match with Stephanie Egger and have her over. Obviously, sport grappling, nothing to do with MMA, but because of her judo credentials, we were going to have her over for a match and organize some of that for some ladies over here in the UK. Obviously, it never materialized, whatever. But we know the credentials of Stephanie Egger's judo. However, as we saw in her last outing, judo has to be applied in MMA in a very specific way. Because obviously, we'll use the technical term, the noaza, when it hits the mat, is very, very, very different in comparison to MMA grappling, in comparison to sport judo. And so, obviously, we don't know too much about Irina, but as you say, Stephanie Page impressed me a lot in her win against Danny McCormack. Obviously, Danny McCormack has gone on to do really, really good things. And so that win is just sort of burning in the sunlight for Irina. And this division is always one that needs new talent, needs a bit of breath of fresh air. And maybe it's Irina, maybe it's not.
Yeah, 100%. You did mention that she's getting signed off a loss, but she does have that Stephanie Page win coming into the UFC, so she'll be riding in off of that. So she'll be coming in quite confident here against Stephanie Egger. I'm excited to see what happens there. Journey Newson takes on Marcus McGee at 140 pounds. Hayley Cowan and Jamie Lynn Hort, who is an undefeated Canadian, will kick us off in the 135-pound division, and that wraps us up. We'll be back with UFC breakdown, but we're not quite finished yet, Harry. I'm not letting you off the clock just yet. We'll be back on the breakdown to talk about these fights on Tuesday. I have to pick your brain, sir, about Cage Warriors this weekend before we go. You know what I mean? I've been chatting with Johnny. We've been chatting on the L Triangle, but Rhys McKee takes on Judo Jimmy Wallhead. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are heading into that fight. Who do you kind of fancy going in there? Obviously, Judo has been on a big run. Great story last year, him picking up the interim title, and Rhys McKee is on crest of a wave off his first UFC run. Come in undefeated. This will be his third win after being released. It's a good fight, which headlines Cage Warriors 153 in Dublin. Are you excited for that fight? I want to pick your brain about the top three fights. We could talk forever. Do you get excited for these cards with Irish fighters in them? I mean, I'm excited to see the UK prospects as an Irishman. The Luke Rileys, the Lonier Kavanaghs, everyone coming up here. I mean, there is that little extra bit of spice when we are dealing with Irish fighters. But, you know, you obviously as a Welshman living in London, how do you feel about these kind of Irish cards and stuff like that? Do they hit home with you as much as they would with us and the Irish fans?
So for me, one of the reasons I fell in love with Irish MMA was because of the Severe MMA podcast. And I know that sounds fucking inside baseball and whatever, but there isn't the same level of coverage of the UK scene in one siloed place as there was when I first started listening to the Severe MMA podcast. Shawnee would talk about Ian Gary as this 0-0 amateur that nobody's seen yet, but it's really, really good. They talked about James Gallagher when he was coming up, fighting at 15 in some sports hall. They talked about the Rhys McKees. They talked about the you know, whoever it is, whoever the Shelleys, the whatever. And like, you sort of, regardless of nationality, when there is that level of coverage and passion and sort of industry behind the coverage, you can't help really, at least for me, but get excited for these types of things and invest in those stories. Because really, and this is something that Chael Sonnen preaches about all the time, it's your fighting is one thing, but if you invest in somebody's story, you'll pay to watch them regardless. Like we saw that with Conor McGregor. We've seen that with all of the greats. If you can combine both, you're going to the stratosphere. But when I look at an Irish card, specifically because I work for a predominantly Irish MMA media outlet, yes, is the answer. I do get invested in these cards. It does trigger a little bit more, and it does feel, frankly, like you get a Cage Warriors card like this, and it's stacked with a fantastic amount of names here. We
It's
run through
unreal.
the card. Rhys McKee and Jim Wallhead, we'll talk about that in a second. Tobias Tarilla, Ryan Shelley is a fantastic fight. Morgan Charrier versus Pedro Souza. Let's be honest, Charrier is going to win that fight. James Sheehan, Oban Elliot is an absolute screamer of a fight. Deki Makalinen on the card, fantastic. Takamandu, fantastic. Paddy McCrory, another name. Adam Darby, another name to look out for. Leon Hill, coming back after a little bit of a layoff, another one to look for. Solomon Simon, fantastic amateur career. Now he's here. Ryan Curtis, again, somebody that we're just waiting to see blossom into this fighter that we thought he was going to be, and we're waiting to see if that can happen. Alexander O'Sullivan, maybe the most storied amateur in Irish MMA history. We then have Adam Shelley, again, the other brother of the other Shelley. And then we have an Owen Williams and a Carl McClurkin. Like, this is just stacked full to brim with the next generation of Irish MMA fighters. And you don't often get a card. If you go to Manchester, for instance, you don't often get a card full of lads from Manchester, right? You don't get a card full of lads, even from the north. You're getting a smattering of English lads, maybe a couple of Irish lads, a couple of Scots, a couple of Welsh lads, and then that's it. This is full to the brim of Irish talent. And if that isn't something that gets you excited as an Irishman, but also excited as an MMA fan, I don't know what will.
Yeah, I'm of the opinion of that as well. Like, I think Cage Warriors cards in general in Ireland down through the years have just been magic. Obviously we've had some great occasions in other areas as well. A couple of cracking fights in the Indigo as well. But when you get the stories there, when you get the build up, the previews, it all accumulates into what we're going to see on Saturday night. And what we're going to see is, look at number one, it kind of, for me, it takes away a little bit from what we're seeing on the UFC card, where you have a lot of fights that don't really have any meaning to me. I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for the masses. To me, there's a lot of fights with no meaning on the UFC card. But the Cage Warriors card, every single fight has meaning to me. And I think that's why I get really excited and I'm really hyped for this card. The main event, Rhys McKee, Jimmy Wallhead. What do you expect to see, Harry? How do you think these two guys match up?
I really, really struggle to see anything but a Rhys McKee win. Like, okay, Justin Burlinson was able to take Rhys down during points in that fight, but we saw Judo Jimmy stand and strike with Skabinski. I think there would have been grappling exchanges. Skabinski likes to grapple, but that was a huge shock for everyone, right? I think everyone going in, Judo Jimmy Wallhead runs his own gym, is sort of I don't mean this in a nasty way, but a part-time fighter, right? Had a bit of a resurgency in his career there. Comes out, finishes Skabinski with the sweetest hook you'll see. Fine, grand, no worries. Picks up the title. Rhys McKee is a different animal, though. Rhys McKee is a fantastic pressure fighter. He can fight going back. He's very long. He can grapple in his own right. Obviously, if Jimmy can get this into his wheelhouse and can force Rhys into grappling situations where Rhys showed some vulnerability against Justin Burlinson, Justin Burlinson almost finished a fucking heel hook against Rhys McKee, and you don't see that in high-level MMA very often. Obviously, Jimmy Wallhead has some room here to get the win, but Rhys is patient. He's measured. He hits hard. In all of his 12 wins, he has finished all 12 of them. And so we know that he's a fighter that finishing is on his mind always, but you don't see him rush for those finishes. And that is a really, really dangerous fighter. Obviously, I have to say this because I think it's important. Rhys McKee has been in some absolute fucking wars. And although he's 17 fights deep, that chin can go at any moment. And Skabinski's been in some wars recently, and Judo detonated an absolute monstrous hook on his chin and put him away. And so that time can come for any fighter. And so if I'm Rhys McKee, I'm taking the first couple of rounds here to just feel Judo Jimmy out, land my shots, wear him down a touch, make him feel my range, make him feel my power, and then see about committing to a finish later down the line. Because as we saw in the Skabinski fight, Judo Jimmy Wallhead is dangerous early.
Very, very dangerous early, yeah. And that's what makes it a very interesting fight as well. I kind of expect Rhys to get the job done as well. Whether he plays a long game, whether they get an exchange early, it'll be interesting to see. Look at it's Ireland versus Wales in the co-main event, Harry, and another barn burner. Oban and Elliot versus James Sheehan. I tried to break it down with Sean. I tried to break it down with the lads on the Owl Triangle, and I still have no fucking idea how this fight is going to go because these two guys are just so well matched up. And this is a fight that, you always hesitate to put yourself out there and say it, but I don't think this fight does not deliver. This is an unbelievable fight between two prospects and a number one contendership fight too, if you ask me. Would you feel the same?
Yeah, I have the co-main event as Tobias Harila versus Ryan Shelley, and we should.
Oh, they must change. Yeah, they must change. They must have switched that out. That was listed as much. Yeah, no, you're spot on there. That is James Sheehan Oban a little bit earlier in the card.
Right. Let's talk about that anyway. So this is fireworks all over it. James Sheehan with a record of 6-2. We saw him in his debut against Ian Gary, and that was a very competitive fight. Really close fight. Really, really good fight for both men. James Sheehan. My only criticism of James Sheehan is he gets hit a lot and can get hit a lot and is happy to get hit to land his own shots. And Oban Elliot hits really, really, really hard. But we've also seen that Oban Elliott's game is effective at different weight classes, right? Went up to middleweight, fought a guy there, was drastically outsized, and yet was very intelligent, tactically aware, took the guy down, landed his shots, got the submission. Fantastic. Here, I feel like I'd like to see Oban Elliot be just as varied. James Sheehan is predominantly a striker and looks great doing so. Fights well behind his jab, fights well behind his kicks. If I'm Oban Elliot, I'm showing him and trying to implore an MMA style on him because Oban is quite a short, stocky fighter for 170. And so leaping into positions is great for him. But I feel like that isn't the recipe for success against somebody like James Sheehan, who's very aware with his footworks and is very aware with landing shots as guys can come in. But if you can force him to think about the grappling, those situations do start to open up for Oban Elliot. But I think this is a cracking fight. If anyone hasn't already gone and listened, please go and listen to the interview with Mr. Sheehan and Oban Elliot. Fantastic, raw, engaging interview. And it just makes you, it's stuff like that, as you say, that really makes you invest in the story of the fight. And for that alone, I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, and likewise with James, with Andy, gave a great interview too. And both lads have done a great job in building that fight as well. Just being by raw and open and honest. But I have to agree, Oban's interview with Sean was fantastic as well. And it's hard not root for those type of guys, who are willing to lay it all on the line and just give honest assessments of where they're at. Like, those are the kind of answers we don't hear on a regular basis in certain interviews. Look at Tobias Aurelia and Ryan Shelley is the co-main event. That to me is just an absolute barn burner. Another one that's definitely going to deliver. And we're going to find out how good Ryan Shelley is. You don't think it's going to deliver?
I think that it's going to deliver. I just think this is an Ian Dean special. I really think this is about as perfect a matchmaking as you could possibly get. Because what we're going to see here is, does Ryan Shelley's style translate to the higher echelons of MMA in Europe? Tobias Harila is an okay fighter. He's got amazing pressure footwork. He will happily take a lot of shots to land some shots. And he will happily put a guy to sleep with whatever he can get his hands on. But here, Ryan Shelley has to answer some big questions. The thing that worries me in this fight is, do you remember James Montazeri? James Montazeri was a UFC fighter, obviously, and came from that TKD type style.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have so much variation when you're applying that type of style to MMA to make it work. And Ryan Shelley, with that type of style, with the footwork, with the in and out, with the angle changing, is going to need to be absolutely on his P's and Q's here, because Tobias Harila is going to walk him down. And if Ryan Shelley is on his P's and Q's and has managed to figure out a style that works for MMA, he'll probably just kick the head off Tobias Harila. He really probably will. But if it's not, Tobias Harila is going to nail him against the fence and put some coffin nails through his forehead. You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah, that's what makes this a fascinating fight as well, is because, you know, he offers, Tobias Harila offers a lot of issues here for Ryan Shelley, but likewise for Ryan Shelley too. You know, thinking with his TKD background, he's got more submissions in his career than he does knockouts. So it'd be interesting. I think a real statement win here would be a submission win over Tobias Harila, but I'm kind of liking the kind of method that William Gomis fought against Tobias Harila. I think that kind of suit Ryan Shelley a little bit better in here, where you're kind of fighting on your bike and picking them apart and letting them walk you down a little bit, because, you know, forward pressure alone, if you're not landing anything, ain't going to score you jack shit. But really, really exciting fight. Before we wrap it up, anything else on the card? I know you mentioned a few others, but is there any other fight that sticks out to you that you'd like to speak about before we and I think it's going to be impossible not to talk a little bit about this next Tuesday on the Balance Breakdown as well, at least a couple of these fights, to be honest. So buckle up for that as well.
Absolutely. So I'll just say the three names that I'm really interested in seeing. Leon Hill was somebody that sparked my interest a lot in the fights that I've seen so far. Obviously, gave a great interview with Andy and gave his reasons for having some time away. No problem. Let's see him back. Paddy McCrory is a guy I'm quite interested in. And equally, Takamandu is a guy I'm interested in as well. And so keep out for all those fights. And yeah, we'll absolutely do some breakdowns on Tuesday. No problem.
Love it. Love it. That wraps us up for this week. We'll be back again next Thursday, as always, bringing you the preview. Is it 288 next, or do we have one more in between? 288 next week. We got a big one next week. We might have to bring in some heavy hitters for that one. We'll see what happens. But we will be back to discuss all things UFC Fight Night 72, Song Yadong versus Ricky Simón. We might throw in or sprinkle in a little bit of Cage Warriors 153 as well while we're at it. As always, thank you very much to my main man over there, Harry Powell, doing some great stuff. The Severe Spotlight will be out. Fuck, man, we might even get a Severe Spotlight on a Cage Warriors fighter this weekend. We never know. We never know. It's up to the fighters to get that man's attention over there. But you can see that article every Monday on severemma.com. The lads will be back on Sunday on the big podcast to share all their reaction. Follow along Severe MMA all weekend. We'll be covering the UFC. We'll be doing some great coverage. The lads will be live up there at the Tree Arena, giving you some interviews and stuff like that. So keep all eyes on Severe MMA. Sign up to the Severe MMA Patreon for some more great content. Speakers Corner, you left me hanging, and it's kind of my own fault last week. Then I felt real bad when I asked you, why is no Speakers Corner? And it was like, yeah, prick, because Sean recorded the podcast and put it out instead of my Speakers Corner. So I was like, oh shit, I should have said nothing there. I just checked. My normal routine is just check in the morning, Thursday morning, Speakers Corner, bang, on the way to work. Here we go. Wasn't there, but we'll be back this Thursday, I'm assuming, and most other Thursdays on the Severe MMA Patreon. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. It does help us out a lot. Go and follow Harry at BJJ_Harry Powell and myself, O'Neill MMA, on all social media platforms. Take care. Good luck. Enjoy the fights this weekend. We've got some good ones at home and abroad. Take care now. Bye-bye.